Alright, my darlings. Well, with my favourite time of the year now upon us, my birthday, and something to do with Jesus, I guess, it's time to look at a nice festive movie. Though, to be fair, the movie I'm looking at today doesn't really have anything to do with the season, but then again, Frozen doesn't, and it's considered a Christmas classic now. But regardless, today we're looking at the underrated classic, Anastasia. This is a movie that, while it wasn't a very big hit at the time, has become a decent hit, at least thanks to home video releases, and it does have a very dedicated fan base to this day, and part of that comes down to its director, the great Don Bluth.
I'm surprised it's taken me this long to talk about arguably the greatest independent animation king of all time, the one and only Don Bluth. Though these days he's so well known, I feel I don't have to talk about him, but I'll give you the lowdown just for the hell of it. Don Bluth is an artist and animator who got his start being an animator for Disney. Ironically, he joined the company close to when Disney himself died, and some say it was he that was one of the people who kept the company's sense of magic and wonder still alive in Disney's absence. I don't know if I would agree with that sentiment, but his animation was one of the highlights of the post-Walt years. His animation can best be described as a perfect mix between cute and bouncy, but with an element of gritty and detailed in there. Bluth primarily worked in the sketchy animation years of Disney, and his style really fitted the movies back then, with animating characters like Madam Mim from Sword in the Stone, Rabbit from the old Winnie the Pooh movies, and Elliot from Pete's Dragon. He really showed a great sense of having the characters be creatively designed, but also very expressive and defined. But the key skill in Bluth's animation is the amount of motion and life he can give to his characters. It's some of the best automation I've ever seen in a 2D animated film. And the thought of how many days that Bluth had to work on end making the characters look that good is just exhausting to even think about. Bearing in mind that this is back when everything had to be done by hand, so that means every individual nanosecond was painstakingly animated personally.
I bet an old-style animator could give you one hell of a handshake. Among other things.
By the 80s, Disney was in some trouble, both commercially and financially, so this led to a mass exodus of their animators, including others like Tim Burton and Brad Bird, all of which went on to their own projects. And Bluth decided to start his own animation company and make movies the way he wanted to make them, often rivaling Disney movies on their same opening weekends to get back at them. And the movies he made in his early days in the 80s are some of the best animated movies of all time. The Secret of Nim, An American Tail, The Land Before Time, All Dogs Go to Heaven. They're movies that often felt more like a Disney film than what Disney themselves were putting out at the time, though sadly his departure from Disney would end up biting him in the arse when Anastasia was released, but we'll get into that later. Sadly, when the 90s came around, Don's gritty style kinda decided that it wanted to leave too, whether it was from trying to emulate what Disney themselves were doing at the time to get better box office success, or from studio intervention. A lot of his movies in the 90s were nowhere near as well written as his previous ones. They were still very imaginative and well animated, but the stories were a lot more cliché and pandering to kid audiences, and the characters were nowhere near as complex or interesting, with movies like A Troll in Central Park, Rockadoodle, and Thumbelina. Also, a lot of the studios who funded and distributed his previous movies decided that they wanted to make a lot of cheaper sequels to his films, and in doing so also removed any sense of an edge or scale that the originals did. And while some were okay, most were pretty mediocre at best and outright awful at worst, with much cheaper animation, schmaltzier stories, awful songs, and a never-ending greed to just keep making more movies.
Seriously, the Land Before Time movies could rival James Bond in how many there are. Which is something I thought I'd never have to say in my lifetime.
So with his critical reputation falling and his legacy being raped by the same kind of corporate monsters he tried to escape back in the 80s, Don decided to go all out on one of his last movies. A movie that would show the world that he could still be better than Disney and be one of the greatest animation kings of all time, with a movie that was meant to be a send-up of everything Disney was known for at the time, but still done in his own way. So he teamed up with Fox.
First mistake there, Don.
And got to work on Anastasia, which was billed to be a big hit. A lot of money went into the movie itself and even more into the advertising. There were commercials everywhere, toys, a full soundtrack release on CD, a PC video game which was even advertised in the credits, and even a sequel planned.
So how well did it do? Well, considering Don Bluth's not ruling the world of animation right now, what do you think?
See, back then Disney were terrified of anyone who could challenge them for the throne of America's animation darlings. I mean, they were big in the 90s, but it's not like they are now, where they're pretty much one of the 4 pillars of America's economy on their own, and just about own everything that Google and EA doesn't. So when major competitors like this came along, they did everything they could to undermine them.
And did they? Does Mickey Mouse shit in Donald's garden?
Yep, the opening weekend Anastasia came out, they re-released The Little Mermaid specifically for that weekend. And of course, everyone was more apt to see something from their masters rather than from a stranger competitor, and so Anastasia lost out hard on its opening weekend.
Granted, the movie would go on to make almost triple what it originally cost to make, but it didn't seem enough for Fox to want to take on Disney head-on again. Ironically, now that Disney owns Fox now, that technically means Anastasia is a Disney princess. Will they be adding her to the Disney princess line as well?
Out of all of Don Bluth's films, this is the one that has the most divisive opinion about it. Some saying it deserves to be put aloft with some of his greatest films from the 80s, others saying it was one of the last nails in the coffin of his career. But which one is the true observation? Well, let's take a look and find out. The movie opens in St. Petersburg with a ball being thrown by the rulers of Russia, the Romanovs.
I think Russia definitely prefers them to the Jakhanovs.
The Empress, played by the great Angela Lansbury, and her granddaughter, the Duchess Anastasia, talk about how the Empress will be moving back to Paris after the ball and how Anna will miss her.
She begged me not to return to Paris, so I had a very special gift made for her to make the separation easier.
It plays our lullaby.
So that's what Mrs. Price did to the knob in Bedknobs and Broomsticks after the movie was over. Does the travelling spell still work now that it's a music box?
Suddenly, the ball is interrupted by the arrival of the villain, Rasputin, who is here to get revenge on the Romanovs for betraying him.
Rasputin. We thought he was a holy man, but he was a fraud.
But I am your confidant.
Confidant.
Ha! You are a traitor!
Oh yeah, Gregory Rasputin! The guy who died a year before the uprising of the Bolsheviks, which is when this movie takes place. And also kinda regenerated into this guy.
Okay, many people have complained about how historically inaccurate this film is, and with good reason. They're just taking a bunch of historically significant events and people and smashing them together to make a compelling story. And granted, this is supposed to be a fairy tale, but when it's based on historical events, especially ones that are so recent, it just makes it confusing and slightly offensive. And granted, Disney wasn't immune to this either, but to Pocahontas' credit, which is one of the few things you'll ever hear an animation guru say, the historical story they chose was so much further back in the past that no one would have a living memory of it when it came out. But with this, even today a person could come up to you and say, I was there, this isn't what happened.
But whatever, movie with dramatic license, I'm sure they're not going to be that ridiculous with it.
Rasputin sold his soul for the power to destroy them.
Or they'll make his story something out of Hellraiser.
Yeah, seriously, Rasputin sells his soul to the devil to give himself demonic powers in order to destroy the Romanovs.
All you need is a wisecracking animal sidekick and you'll have everything in the 90s animated villain checklist.
Just one problem there, fella. Anastasia's dead. Dead. Am I right, my friend?
How is it that the Boney M song is a better representation of this guy?
Ra-Ra-Rasputin, Russia's greatest love machine.
Well, whatever. Rasputin, played by Christopher Lloyd, and his sidekick Bartok the Back, played by Hank Azaria, who are both by far the best parts of this movie.
Go. Fulfill your dark purpose.
Actually, considering how long you've been dead, you look pretty good. Sir, is this the face of a bat who would lie to you?
Is there going to be another stupid self-promoting documentary made called The Problem with Bartok made about this guy now?
They caused the Russian Revolution to begin, which, again, the real Rasputin had nothing to do with. He was kind of the original progenitor, but he never caused an actual uprising. But regardless, he and his revolutionaries storm the royal palace and wipe out the entire Romanov family and their servants. The only survivors being Anastasia, her grandmother, and a young servant boy who escaped using the servants' passage.
Wow, that sounded more dirtier than I intended it to be.
Rasputin tries to cut them off at the pass on a frozen lake, but ends up dying in a way that is actually quite accurate to how the real Rasputin died.
Master!
Well, you get 1 point on that one movie. Despite the fact that you left out the poisoning, the bludgeoning, and the gunshot wounds. Yeah, the real Rasputin was kind of like old Russia's John Cena.
However, during their escape to Paris, Anastasia is accidentally left behind and knocked out, giving her amnesia, and ends up growing up in an orphanage outside of Petersburg. After an impressive but kind of pointless song sequence,
The biggest con in history! Who knows? Shh!
we cut to Anastasia, now going by Anya and voiced by Meg Ryan, grown up and being looked after by a woman who looks like an amalgamation of every villain Bluth animated in his Disney years, and lets her go from the orphanage so she can find her family, despite not knowing who they are or even if they exist.
With that solid goal in mind, she'll probably find her family in about 4 decades, if she's lucky. Her only clue as to where to start looking is the key that opens the music box, which she still has around her neck, which says, "Together in Paris."
So, you want to go to France to find your family. It's time to take your place in life and in line, and be grateful too.
It really shows the contrast between the character designs in this scene, one looking like a cartoon character and the other looking like they were traced over the voice actor's photo. I mean, Don Bluth's designs have been a bit jarring before in his previous movies, but never this much.
You've been a thorn in my side since you were brought here, acting like the Queen of Sheba.
After coming across her canine sidekick for the movie, Anya makes her way to the old palace and starts to see flickers of her old life, which leads to, honestly, the best part of the whole damn movie.
Across my memory, someone holds me safe and warm.
This is the song Once Upon a December, and it is one of the most hauntingly beautiful songs I have ever heard in my life. There are some Disney movies that can't get songs this good, and it really gives you that operatic and epic feel to it, and it really does sound like something you would hear in a Russian ballet.
Most of the music, in my opinion, is pretty forgettable. It's not bad, but just doesn't quite stick out with you as much as other songs from animated musicals. Ironically, the song that came just before this one, Journey to the Past, was nominated for an Academy Award, despite how it's really just a generic 90s heartfelt song, no different from A Whole New World or Something Out There. And yet this song was completely ignored by the Oscars, despite it being amazing and being played multiple times throughout the movie. I mean, for crying out loud, the video game uses it as the opening theme. It was nominated for a Golden Globe, but let's be honest, the Oscars are the thing to aim for in Hollywood. The scene also brings us some of the best animation in the whole movie. It's absolutely astounding and really exemplifies the potential that this movie had, having that feel of big animated films of the time, but done in its own unique way. Honestly, I really wish there were more moments in the movie like this, and to be fair, there are, but there's such a battle of tone and story here, which I'll get into later, that really hampers what this movie could have been. But let's continue on, shall we? Anya is found by Dmitri, the servant who helped her escape all those years ago, now played by John Cusack, and Vlad, a former Russian noble played by Kelsey Grammer.
We are going to reunite The Grand Duchess, Anastasia, with her grandmother.
You do kind of resemble her.
The same blue eyes.
The Romanov eyes.
By Lucifer's beard!
Both are con men who think they found their golden goose in Anya. You see, the Empress survived and is still in Paris, and has offered a reward of 10 million rubles.
So about $8 then.
For anyone who can reunite her with Anastasia. Dmitri and Vlad have been trying to find the right girl they can pawn off as her, as Dmitri still has the music box that Anya left behind in the palace. Thinking that Anya looks just like how the princess would look now, combined with the further convincing the music box would provide, they decide to head off to Paris to get their reward, convincing Anya that her family will be there too. But they're not the only ones with an interest in our young princess.
Esther? You're alive?
Yeah, the manner of speaking.
I saw her. Anastasia.
Alive?
Talk about shooting your mouth off, man.
Yes, the lover of the Russian queen is still alive. Sort of. Turns out the deal he made with the devil ensured that he couldn't die as long as any of the Romanovs lived, and since Anastasia is still alive...
And her grandmother, but the curse doesn't seem to care about her for some reason.
Rasputin will remain in a state of limbo until she dies, and so vows to use his powers and dark minions to destroy her and return to life.
That's why I'm stuck here in limbo. My curse is unfulfilled. Now my dark purpose will be fulfilled, and the last of the Romanovs will die!
And here we come to the main point about why I feel the movie is rather conflicting and confusing, and it's something I noticed back when I was the president of the Animation Society for the University of Sussex, and I did a whole blog post about it which you can find on my website if you want to go into further detail about it. But I noticed how this movie has more than a very striking resemblance to Princess and the Frog.
Now you might be wondering what that has to do with anything, especially since Princess and the Frog came out almost a decade after this movie. Well, both movies were the second to last shot from a struggling animation studio trying to regain some popularity and money. Both movies are set in the same time period, but most importantly, both are movies with stories that are far too complicated than they need to be. For all the good points that Princess and the Frog has, and I do like the movie, the story is far too overly complicated and feels like a very rushed job, since there are so many plot details that feel like they aren't developed properly, and it really makes the whole viewing experience feel like it's missing something, and sadly Anastasia suffers from the same problem. The story of the Lost Russian Princess does have a lot of nitty-gritty details, but at its core it's a simple story, a person trying to find their true purpose in life, in this case a lost loved one, and their journey to achieve that. And that premise has enough depth to fill a movie-length story. Adding all this stuff with an evil wizard and an ancient curse, plus with the extra characters added on top, the fact that two of our main characters are doing this as a con, plus the romance subplot. Oh yeah, spoilers, Anya and Dmitri start falling for each other later, though honestly, were there any doubts that would happen? And trying to add in musical numbers, comic relief, and any other of the tropes that family movies at the time had just makes it feel like there's way too much going on in this movie, and it makes it seem like there's nothing in the movie that is fully developed as a result. Everything just feels a bit hollow, with the exception of a few scenes, more of which we'll get to later, but of course they needed all this stuff back then because an animated movie about a woman finding her family with none of this over-the-top and cliched bits from the time wouldn't have pulled in a big enough audience, which just makes the whole movie feel like it was formed by a focus group, which isn't a surprise when Fox were the people who were funding it, and it's exemplified, like I said, by how contrasting the character designs are. Animated movies back then knew how to balance all their elements but have the characters all look unique but still look as if they reasonably still inhabit the same world. Here, everything just feels like a too many cooks situation.
It may seem like a harsh observation, but I really do feel like it brings the movie down, even though I do for the most part quite like the movie, and there are some parts about it which are amazing. I feel like it's not really living up to its true potential.
But with that said, this scene does give us the second best part of the movie, the villain song, In the Dark of the Night.
In the dark of the night I was tossing and turning. It scared me out of my wits. A corpse falling to bits. Then I opened my eyes and the nightmare was me. In the dark of the night, people will find her.
If there is one thing that Don Bluth can always bring for us, it's villain songs.
In the dark of the night, people will find her.
Sadly, Christopher Lloyd doesn't provide the voice for Rasputin's singing scenes, but the great Jim Cummings stepped in for him and does an amazing job as always.
As the pieces fall into place, I'll see her crawl into place. Your Svedanya, Anya, your grace. Farewell.
Especially when you ponder for a minute and realise the fact that this guy is the same guy who does the voice for Winnie the Pooh.
Come, my minions, rise for your master. Let your evil shine.
It'd be a totally different scene if he looked like that. Although, to be fair, some of the direct-to-DVD Winnie the Pooh movies have scenes that are not completely unlike this.
Rasputin then releases his demon minions to find and destroy Anya.
Another parallel to Princess and the Frog.
Which leads us to our next scene where Anya, Dmitri and Vlad are on a train headed for Paris, where our pair of characters who actually look like human beings spar off with some banter.
Anya, I'm just trying to help, alright?
Dmitri? Do you really think I'm royalty?
You know I do.
Then stop bossing me around.
Why do I get the feeling that this is what happened when Meg Ryan first met Tom Hanks?
Of course, our wannabe Power Ranger villain's henchmen find her, which leads to a pretty exciting scene where they have to try and derail the train, and also leads to some pretty damn good CGI integration. The team work together to get themselves to safety, which makes Rumpelstiltskin do this.
That's just how I imagine the smartest and most charming despot of the time to react in the face of failure.
After Bartok casually tries to smash Rasputin's relic, he reveals that it's his lifeline, and if it's destroyed, so is he.
My very existence depends on it, and you almost destroyed it.
I get it! You break it, you bought it!
Which is why he decides to scratch it with his finger a few seconds later.
Something really cruel.
That'd be like if I flicked my own heart if it was still in me. Not that I could do it if it wasn't in me.
Halfway to their destination, our motley crew decides to give Anya an education on how to be a proper Duchess, in one of the better songs in the movie, and one of the ones I do remember quite well.
You were born in a palace by the sea.
A palace by the sea. Could it be?
Yes, that's right. We've lots and lots to teach you, and the time is going fast. Most of all, remember this. If I can learn to do it, you can learn to do it.
I tell you, there's one thing she can't learn. How to sing without a double.
But try to float. I feel a little foolish. Am I floating?
Like a little boat.
After this, Anya actually starts to believe that she is the Lost Duchess, though whether Vlad and Dmitri believe it is another matter. Regardless, they make their way to the fatherland and catch a boat to Paris.
Given the time period, just count yourself lucky if you don't find Leonardo DiCaprio or Celine Dion on that boat as well.
After some contracted mandatory protagonist flirting, complete with awkward banter...
That dress is really beautiful. I mean, it was nice on the hanger, but it looks even better on you. You should wear it.
I am wearing it.
Oh, right.
And a brief moment of introspection from Anya when she sees the music box.
Pretty jewelry box, isn't it?
Jewelry box. Are you sure that's what it is?
What else could it be?
Rasputin's evil sea monkeys have returned once again.
Dude, what took you so long? Several days have passed since you last attacked her. What have you been doing the whole time? Just sitting around trying to become a part of the Dead Hand Gang?
This leads to yet another exciting action scene, but much like the last one, it kinda gives you tone whiplash, since the movie, for the most part, keeps itself rather down-to-earth and low-key. And then the green Scream team show up, and I suddenly feel like I'm watching a lost episode of He-Man. Though I will admit that her Nightmare on Elm Street-style dream sequence, which parallels her danger in the real world, is a nice touch.
Pleasant dreams to you, princess. I'll get inside your mind. Yes. Jump!
I mean, he kind of already looks like Freddy anyway.
This leads to yet another surreal freakout scene.
I have no feelings whatsoever. I feel a sudden onset of clarity, Bartok.
I've heard about taking a long hard look inside yourself, but that takes some beating.
Rasputin decides that in order for her to be truly done with the curse, that he'll need to go and kill Anya himself.
Time to go.
But you're dead! You're falling apart, sir! How do you expect to get to Paris in one piece?
I thought we'd take the train.
But don't worry about that, because the movie proceeds to forget about it for the next half an hour.
Meanwhile, our heroes finally arrive in Paris, and we're reintroduced to the Empress. And, well, they definitely chose the right woman to voice her, because like the real Angela Lansbury, she doesn't seem to age at all. And her cousin and confidant Sophie, and...
Sophie! Stanislavskayevna, Somakov.
My, that's a whole lot of Rosie. Seriously, you could ski down that cleavage. Not that I'm complaining, mind.
Unfortunately, after being swindled with so many fake Anastasias for years, the Empress has officially given up on finding the real one, and so refuses to see Anya, despite how, when being asked the question of how she escaped, makes Dmitri realise that she is actually the genuine article, since she remembers how he helped her escape.
How did you escape during the siege of the palace?
A boy who worked in the palace. He opened a wall.
I was the boy in the palace, the one who opened the wall. She's the real thing, Vlad.
And you
will walk out of her life forever. Princesses don't marry kitchen boys.
Well, that's a bit of forced drama right there. You'd think that she's a princess now, that she'll forget about the man who helped bring her back to her family.
Yeah, this is just a really forced bit to add conflict to the romance in the third act, not helped by how Anya overhears how Dmitri has really been a con artist for years and gets cross-wired about it and storms off.
It was all a lie, wasn't it?
No.
You used me? I was just part of your con to get her money?
Regardless, after the ballet, Dmitri manages to convince the Empress to see Anya, or rather forces her to, and it leads to a genuinely beautiful and emotional moment, and one of the few bits of genuosity and proper heart in the movie.
I just want to know who I am. Whether or not I belong to a family. Your family.
What is that?
This? Well, I've always had it ever since before I can remember. The music box. To sing me to sleep when you were in Paris.
Soon you'll be home with me.
I've got no jokes, it's a genuinely really good scene, and it's the return of the best song in the movie, which makes it even better.
Oh, Anastasia. My Anastasia.
Although that being said, for all these years she was looking, she never thought of doing a blood test? I mean, granted DNA testing isn't what it's like now back then, but it could have helped narrow it down, especially since the Russian royal family were very stringent on who they married and famously had blood issues, so it would have helped a lot. Regardless, after this scene, Dmitri does his forced broken romance bullshit and says his farewells to Vlad, but Anastasia runs after him, of course, because every 90s romance ended with one of the couple trying to stop one of them from running away, and the only reason it's not at an airport here is because they weren't around yet. But unfortunately, Rasputin rears his ugly head.
Dude, where have you been? The villain from Mulan is mocking you for sitting around and doing nothing.
Look what 10 years has done to us. You, a beautiful young flower. Me, a rotting corpse.
Hey, don't sell yourself short, mate. You look exactly like you did 15 years ago. I guess falling into a frozen lake helps stop you from decaying. Or should I say, festering? I'm sorry, I couldn't resist.
And on that note, here's another joke I couldn't resist.
I was frozen today!
I know that there are people who were eagerly awaiting that one.
Rasputin tries to kill Anastasia in the most overdramatic way possible. She's 3 feet in front of you, mate. Just snap her neck and get it over and done with. But then Dmitri shows up to try and help her out, but old Raspy throws him into the TriStar logo.
Dmitri!
Watch out!
Be careful, Dmitri. His body is CG, but his mane and tail are cell animated. He's highly unstable.
Fortunately, Anastasia manages to wrestle Raspberry to the ground, and in a stunning bit of breaking from form in an animated movie from the 90s, the female protagonist is the one who does the villain in at the end.
Das Vidanya!
Seriously, that's actually pretty ahead of its time. I mean, think about it. Every Disney movie before this, regardless of who the main character was, it was always the male character who did the villain in at the end.
The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, and bearing in mind this movie came out a full year before Mulan. Even in Don Bluth's own movie, Secret of NIMH, Mrs. Brisby isn't the one who takes out Jenna in the end. So this might be the first mainstream animated movie where the female character beats the bad guy at the end. So that's definitely one good point I can give to the movie. After that, Dimitri and Anastasia finally get together properly and live happily ever after, although this bit is a bit messed up.
Grandmama, wish me luck. We'll be together in Paris again soon.
They've eloped. Isn't it romantic?
Your grandmother has been looking for you for over a decade now, and now that she's finally found you, you're saying to her in a fucking note, "See ya, Granny, I'm off to get plowed by some generic animated arm candy." That's messed up.
It's a perfect ending.
No, it's a perfect beginning.
So long, everybody.
But sadly, it wasn't, because this ended up being one of the last Don Bluth movies ever made.
He would end up making 2 more movies after this, Bartok the Magnificent, a spin-off of our favourite Russian bloodsucker, which was a lot more cartoony and kid-friendly than Anastasia, and is technically a prequel too, since the boy prince in the movie is actually the ancestor of Anastasia.
How old is Bartok supposed to be, anyway?
Sadly, Rasputin is not in the movie, though Kelsey Grammer does return, but this time voicing Bartok's partner, Zozie the Dancing Bear, and does a great job as always.
Oh, yeah.
Both sides are the same.
Exactly even.
Good! Then you won't mind if I take this side.
This is one more Emmy than you'll ever win, you bantering jack-in-the-box.
And also features the voices of Tim Curry, Catherine O'Hara, and Jennifer Tilly. It's not a bad movie, but it's nothing special. Bluth's final movie would be Titan A.E., which of all of the Don Bluth movies is the one that I've heard the least about. But maybe one day I'll visit it in the future.
But what of Anastasia? Does it deserve to be held up there with some of Don's best?
Well, sadly it still suffers from the same problems a lot of his 90s movies suffered from. The story's not great, regardless of its historical inaccuracies, and was clearly written by a chart in the studio. It tonally feels very inconsistent, and feels like it misses its mark a bit on what it truly could have been. But unlike a lot of his 90s movies, the characters are actually pretty good. Anastasia is a very charming, witty and fun character, and Meg Ryan does a good job of portraying her. I'm not really a big fan of Dimitri. He kind of feels like John Cusack is trying too hard to make him feel like a smarmy, wise-ass con man, and it feels really fake, but he's not intolerable. Kelsey is great as Vlad, Lansbury is fantastic as the Empress, and despite how bizarre the villains are in the movie, they are a lot of fun. Azaria, Lloyd, and Cummings do a great job in portraying them as well. It's probably the best of Bluth's post-80s period. The Pebble and the Penguin does have its moments, and even I can admit that I do like the look of Rockadoodle, but both of the movies had terrible stories and boring characters. Here the story isn't great, but it can be engaging and has some emotional moments, and the characters can be interesting too.
And thankfully the movie's fan base has made sure that this swept under the rug movie hasn't been totally forgotten.
To the point where, as of a few years ago, a Broadway musical version now exists.
I'd say if it wasn't for studio interference and a bit more streamlining of the story, it could have been an all-time classic, but as it is very entertaining. It's gorgeous to look at, and it does have some great songs, and it is a good choice for the festive season, but it's not one that I would put up there with A Land Before Time or An American Tale. But for now, I've had enough of this. I'm going on the other side to have a bath. Bye!